You think the scariest town is the one with ghosts? Wrong. Some of the creepiest towns in America are terrifying because they still look normal. In this video, we're counting down 10 towns where people disappear quietly. Places that feel like someone hit the mute button on an entire community. Places where the ground changes mood like a phone after a glitchy update. And railroad towns where trains still thunder through like a heartbeat while the population is basically close to zero. Each town on this list has a different reason, and the closer we get to the end, the harder it is to believe. And if you've ever said, "I'm just stopping for 5 minutes," trust me, there are a few towns in this video that will make you stay in the car the whole time. Number 10, Niland, California. Niland is the kind of place that makes you check your rearview mirror, not because someone is following you, but because the land itself feels like it might be. You drive out into the Imperial Valley where the horizon looks bleached, the air shimmers, and the silence is so clean it feels suspicious. And then you learn the first detail that sticks in your throat. There is a mud volcano nearby that does not just bubble, it moves, slowly, stubbornly, like a problem with a calendar and a plan. Locals call it the Niland geyser, even though it is not the postcard kind of geyser. It is more like the earth clearing its throat and refusing to stop. For years it crept across the desert, and it got serious enough that people had to protect highways and rail lines from a patch of ground that basically decided to take a walk. Imagine explaining to your boss why you were late. Sorry, the dirt changed lanes. Niland sits right next to another thing that feels wrong in a quieter way, the Salton Sea. From a distance, it looks like water, like relief. Up close, it feels like a reminder. A shrinking inland sea in the middle of the desert, surrounded by wind, salt, and the kind of smell that convinces you to roll your windows up and pretend you do not have lungs. When the shoreline pulls back, the exposed lake bed can turn into dust, and the wind out here does not ask permission. It just delivers. This is where the disappearance part starts to feel real, even without any horror movie theatrics. In big cities, people disappear in crowds. In places like Niland, people disappear from the grid. A few miles away is Slab City, a famously off-the-map community where normal is optional and addresses are more like suggestions. Some people end up here because they want out of bills, out of expectations, out of the constant glow of a life that never stops notifying you. If Los Angeles is a group chat that never shuts up, this is airplane mode as a lifestyle. And yet, right under this uncanny landscape, there is industry. Geothermal plants, talk of lithium, energy dreams. It is like standing in a desert that looks abandoned, while the ground beneath it quietly becomes valuable. Niland feels like a place where the future and the fallout are sharing the same zip code, and neither one is willing to move. So if you ever find yourself here, ask a simple question. If the road goes quiet, the signal drops, and the land starts acting alive, would you keep driving forward, or would you turn around while you still feel like the map remembers you? Number 9, Bombay Beach, California. Bombay Beach sounds like it should be sunscreen, boardwalks, and beach chairs. But when you get there, the first thing you notice is what you can't see. The water is right there, the Salton Sea is right there, and yet the town sits behind a berm like it's hiding from its own shoreline. It's a beach town with a wall between it and the beach. Imagine paying extra for an ocean view, and then someone installs a privacy fence and tells you, "Trust me, it's still beautiful." This place used to sell a promise. Mid-century people came out here for weekend escapes, boat races, desert sunshine, and the simple thrill of having water in the middle of nowhere. Then the sea changed. The appeal thinned out, and the town started to empty in the slowest, quietest way. Not the dramatic kind of abandonment where everyone runs at once. More like the kind where your neighbors move out, the next house goes dark, and one day you realize you haven't heard a lawnmower in years. Bombay Beach feels like a town that's been left on low power mode. The streets are flat and bright. The sky is huge, and the silence has this odd weight to it. If the wind kicks up, it carries a reminder that the Salton Sea is shrinking and the shoreline keeps pulling back. The exposed lake bed turns into dust, and the desert doesn't keep secrets. It spreads them. You can stand there and feel how a place can fade without ever officially disappearing. And then you see the art. That's the part that makes Bombay Beach different from a typical ghost town. Instead of pretending the decline never happened, the town wears it like a jacket covered in patches. Old TVs stacked into sculptures, strange installations rising out of sand. A vibe that says, yeah, we know it's weird here, so let's make it intentionally weird. It's like the town looked at its own ruins and decided to decorate them before anyone could call it tragic. There's something almost unsettling about that resilience, because the art isn't just for tourists. It's a signal, a flare, a way of saying, we're still here, even as the map around them starts to feel emptier. People don't vanish here in a horror movie way. They vanish in a modern way. They move away, they unplug, they stop being counted, and the town becomes a backdrop for anyone still willing to stand in the quiet and listen. So here's the question. If you found a place where the air tastes like salt and distance, where the streets feel paused, and the shoreline keeps retreating like it's done with you, would you stay for the art, or would you leave before the silence learns your name? Number 8, St. Thomas, Nevada. St. Thomas is a town that does something most places can't. It disappears, and then it comes back. Out in the Lake Mead National Recreation Area, there's a dusty trail that leads you toward what should be open desert. And then you start seeing it. A line of old walls. A foundation. The outline of rooms that once held real lives. Not a movie set, not a themed attraction, just a town that spent decades underwater, quietly erased by a rising reservoir. And now, when the lake pulls back, shows itself again like it's checking to see who's still paying attention. St. Thomas wasn't built to be mysterious. It began as a small settlement with big desert optimism, the kind of place where people tried to turn heat and distance into a normal routine. It even sat along an early travel route, one of those old paths that helped connect the West before interstates turned everything into fast forward. Then the modern world arrived with a different plan. Lake Mead filled in the 1930s and the water didn't negotiate. It climbed. And a whole town slipped beneath the surface, not with sirens, not with headlines that matched the scale of what happened, just a slow, official kind of goodbye. That's what makes it creepy, not ghosts, not legends, the silence of logistics. Picture the moment it hits you on the trail. You're walking under a sun that feels like a bright interrogation lamp. The air is still, your shoes crunch over pale dirt, and you look down and realize you're standing where a kitchen used to be, a living room, a front step where someone probably shook sand out of their boots and thought about tomorrow. Now it's a ruin, sun-bleached and exposed, like the lake drained a memory and left the frame behind. And the lake is still nearby. That's the part your brain can't quite relax around, because the town isn't saved. It's on loan. If the water rises again, it can vanish again. St. Thomas is basically the West's most unsettling pop-up museum, limited time exhibit. Conditions apply. There's also something oddly modern about it. We like to believe places disappear because of drama, but sometimes they disappear because of infrastructure, because of a decision made far away. St. Thomas feels like a reminder that the map isn't permanent. It's just the current version. And if you want a little humor to cut the tension, here it is. This might be the only ghost town in America that got evicted by a spreadsheet. No haunted house required, just a reservoir doing what reservoirs do. So if you ever hike out here and the wind goes quiet, ask yourself one question. When a town can slip under the water for generations and return like nothing happened, how many other places have disappeared in America without anyone really watching? Number 7, Portlock, Alaska. Portlock is the kind of place that feels like it's been removed from the world on purpose. No highways, no casual, let's swing by. If you want to get there, you go by boat or plane, and that alone changes the mood. Because in most towns, the scariest moment is what happens after dark. In Portlock, the scariest moment is realizing how far you are from help in the first place. This little settlement on the Kenai Peninsula wasn't built for mystery, it was built for work. In the early 1900s, Portlock grew around fishing and a cannery, the kind of rough, practical economy that keeps a coastal village alive. The town even had a post office, the normal little sign that says, "People live here, people plan to stay." And then sometime in the late 1940s, the place started emptying out. By 1949, it was essentially abandoned. The post office closed in 1950, and Portlock became one of those names that survives on maps long after the life drains out of it. Here's where the story grips you. Why would a working town, remote but functional, pull up its roots like that? The straightforward answer is the one people don't like because it's boring. Economics shifted, routes changed, and isolated places got left behind. When roads and supply lines favor other towns, communities like this don't collapse, chalk, in one dramatic moment. They fade. The lights go out one by one, the last family leaves, and the silence moves in like it paid rent. But Portlock has a second layer, and it's the one that keeps this place living inside people's heads. Locals and later storytellers talk about something in the surrounding wilderness, a presence. A figure from indigenous lore often called Newtok, described like a wild, human-sized shadow that doesn't want you there. Stories say people stopped going into the woods alone, that the fear didn't feel like a campfire tale, it felt like a warning. And when enough people share the same fear, it stops being just a story and starts becoming behavior. That's the unsettling part. Portlock doesn't need a monster to be creepy. It just needs isolation, fog, dark tree lines, and a community that decided the risk wasn't worth it. Imagine waking up in a place where the ocean is calm, the mountains are watching, and the forest behind your house feels a little too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your brain do inventory. Phone signal, fuel, daylight, distance to the nearest person who would notice if you didn't come home. And if you need a little reality check to cut the tension, here it is. Portlock is basically a do not disturb setting for an entire town. Gorgeous scenery, zero services, and the strong suggestion that you should not overstay your welcome. So ask yourself, if a whole community can vanish without a single explosion or headline, just a slow retreat into the safer parts of the world, what would it take for you to leave a place forever? Number 6. Hanford, White Bluffs. Washington, Hanford, and White Bluffs aren't creepy because they're cursed. They're creepy because they were erased politely. Picture this. You live in a small river valley town. You've got orchards, neighbors, a school, a church, and the kind of daily routine that feels permanent, because it's been the same for years. Then one day a letter arrives. It doesn't scream, it doesn't threaten. It just informs you that the federal government has claimed the entire area for the war effort, and you have about 30 days to leave. That's what happened here in 1943 when two communities along the Columbia River, Hanford and White Bluffs, were cleared to make room for a massive secret project. The reason wasn't folklore, it was logistics, isolation, electricity from nearby dams, a river that could supply endless cooling water. In other words, it was the perfect place to build something the government didn't want anyone watching. And the towns didn't die the normal way. They didn't collapse from unemployment. They didn't fade after a mine closed. They were switched off, whole streets emptied, farms and orchards were left behind. It's the kind of disappearance that feels colder than any ghost story because it's organized. It has a deadline, but the detail that hits hardest is this. Even the cemetery didn't stay put. White Bluffs graves were moved, coffins were relocated to another town, and families were left with the quiet, lasting discomfort of not knowing if every marker really matched every person. That's a special kind of haunting, when memory itself gets relocated like it's furniture. Today, if you look for the towns, you won't find a lively main street. You'll find traces, ruins. A bank building people still photograph because it looks like a scene that got paused mid-sentence. Overlooks where the wind comes off the river and everything feels too open, too exposed, like the landscape is pretending nothing happened. And that's the uneasy part. The scenery is beautiful. The history underneath it is not. Here's the thing that makes this entry perfect for quietly disappearing. This wasn't a mystery built on rumors. It was a disappearance built on paperwork and secrecy. The kind of event that proves you can lose a town without a single monster involved. Just a decision made far away by people who never had to pack the boxes. And if you need a little humor to keep your pulse from spiking, think of it like the most terrifying homeowners association ever created. Except instead of a fine for your lawn, they took the entire neighborhood. So when you stand near the Columbia River and imagine the lights going out one by one, ask yourself, if a community can vanish on a schedule and the world keeps moving like nothing happened, how many other places have been quietly removed from the story of America? Number 5. Thurmond, West Virginia. Thurmond is one of the strangest kinds of ghost town because it never fully went silent. The trains still come through, the tracks are still alive, and yet the town around them feels like it's been gently turned off, like someone dimmed the lights and forgot to turn them back on. You find Thurmond tucked into the New River Gorge, squeezed between steep hills and a river that looks beautiful in a way that almost feels suspicious. The whole place sits along the rail line like it was built for one purpose: serve the railroad, feed the coal machine, and keep everything moving. And for a while, it worked. In the early 1900s, this town was buzzing. Crowded platforms, busy storefronts, the kind of place where money changed hands fast and everyone had somewhere they needed to be. It wasn't a sleepy mountain village. It was a boomtown with a timetable. Then the world changed its habits. Coal operations shifted, technology moved on. Diesel engines replaced older systems, and the railroad didn't need a full town's worth of workers and services the way it used to. Cars became normal, roads got better, people stopped waiting for trains the way they once did. And Thurmond began to shrink, not with a single dramatic disaster, but with a slow, practical retreat. That's the creepy part. Thurmond didn't collapse, it drained. Today, the official population is so small it sounds like a joke. You could fit the whole town into one minivan and still have room for a cooler and a dog. And yet, there's a depot. It's restored. It stands there like a memory that refused to rot. There's even an Amtrak stop here, which is wild when you think about it. A passenger train can pull into a town that barely has anyone left to wave at it. Imagine stepping off in Thurmond and realizing the loudest thing greeting you is the wind and the echo of your own shoes. Walking through Thurmond feels like walking through a paused scene. Empty buildings stare back at you. Faded signs hang on like they're waiting for customers who aren't coming. The river keeps running, the hills keep looming, and every time a train rolls through, it's like the town gets a heartbeat for 30 seconds. Then it passes and the quiet drops back in. And if you need a little humor to keep your nerves from doing cartwheels, here's the best way to describe it. Thurmond is like a restaurant that still has a working kitchen, but no dining room. The food is moving, the service is moving, the customers are gone. So here's the question Thurmond leaves you with. If a place can lose almost everyone, but still keep the sound of life rushing through it every day, what does it mean for a town to be alive? Would you feel safer in a place with no trains at all, or in a place where the world keeps passing by and nobody stays? Number 4. Bayou, Corne, Louisiana. Bayou, Corne, Louisiana is the kind of place where the fear doesn't come from something you see. It comes from something you feel. A faint tremor under your feet, a strange bubbling on the surface of the bayou, a smell that makes your instincts sit up straight, like your body knows the environment is trying to tell you something. This is a small community in the swampy quiet of Assumption Parish, the kind of place built around water, trees, and routines that don't change much. And then in 2012, something happened that turned home into a question mark overnight. A sinkhole opened up near Bayou Corne, and it wasn't a neat little hole you can fence off and forget. It was a growing, shifting wound in the landscape, mud, water, and debris swallowing space that used to be solid ground. But the part that makes Bayou Corne perfect for a story about people quietly disappearing is what came before the hole. Residents had been reporting odd signs: minor shaking, gas bubbling up through the water, things that sound small until you picture them happening outside your front door. Imagine hearing a soft, constant fizz in the bayou at night. Not the relaxing kind, the kind that makes you turn off your porch light and listen harder. When the sinkhole formed, officials began urging people to leave. Families packed up, streets emptied. Not because of a hurricane, not because of a crime wave, but because the land itself had stopped behaving like land. And if you've ever lived somewhere you trust, the ground, the roads, the foundation under your house, you know how unsettling it is to have that trust pulled out from under you. It's like living in a building where the fire alarm keeps chirping, except the alarm is the swamp and the batteries are the earth. The explanation is industrial and geological, which almost makes it scarier because it's real. Underneath the area, there were salt caverns connected to energy operations. Something went wrong. A cavern collapsed, and the surface began to respond. That's what people don't expect about modern danger. Sometimes it doesn't arrive with sirens. Sometimes it shows up as paperwork, evacuation notices, monitoring stations, and officials telling you, don't go back yet. And here's the strange, darkly funny part. In a horror movie, you run from the monster. In Bayou Corne, you run from a hole that doesn't chase you. It just expands. It's the slowest, most stubborn threat imaginable. Like the world's worst pothole, except it's hungry. So think about what it means to disappear here. It isn't someone vanishing into the woods. It's a whole neighborhood fading out because the land is no longer dependable. No dramatic goodbye, just moving trucks, empty driveways, and a place that feels like it's still waiting to see if anyone dares to return. If your backyard started bubbling tomorrow, would you trust the explanation? Or would you trust the feeling in your stomach telling you to leave? Number 3, Libby, Montana. Libby, Montana looks like the kind of town people move to when they want peace. Mountains on the horizon, clean river air, quiet streets where you can actually hear your own footsteps. It has that postcard calm that makes you think nothing bad happens here. And that's exactly why Libby gets under your skin. Because the danger wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It didn't come running at you out of the woods. It floated. For decades, Libby was tied to a mine that produced vermiculite, a mineral used in insulation and other products. On paper, it sounds harmless, just another small-town industry keeping paychecks flowing. But the vermiculite ore in this area was contaminated with a particularly hazardous form of asbestos. And asbestos doesn't announce itself. It doesn't smell. It doesn't sparkle. It's the kind of problem that blends into daily life until enough time passes for everyone to realize something went terribly wrong. That's why Libby fits quietly disappearing in the most chilling real-world way. This isn't a town where people vanish into a haunted forest. It's a town where normal life kept going while an invisible hazard built up in the background. On work clothes, in dust, in places people didn't think twice about. Over time, it became serious enough that the federal government treated it as a major environmental and public health response. The cleanup effort here has been huge, stretching across neighborhoods, industrial areas, and long-term monitoring work that doesn't end when the trucks leave. And the detail that hits hardest is the official language. Libby became known nationally as a place where the scale of the health risk was so severe it triggered an emergency-level response. That's not the kind of label you expect to hear attached to a quiet mountain town. It's like finding out your cozy cabin getaway comes with a warning sign written in legal terms. Picture what it feels like to live with that kind of history. The scenery doesn't change. The river still runs, the snow still falls, tourists still pass through, but the town carries a second atmosphere. one made of questions. How long was this happening? Before anyone understood it, how many people were exposed before the danger had a name? And how do you trust a place again when the threat wasn't a person you can avoid, but something you breathed without thinking? If you need a little dark humor to keep the tension from turning into a headache, here it is. Libby is like a beautiful rental car that looks perfect in the photos. And then you open the glove box and find the world's longest list of extra fees. The view is free. The hidden cost is what makes you swallow hard. Libby isn't creepy because it's empty. It's creepy because it teaches you the scariest lesson of all. Sometimes the worst danger doesn't chase you. It just waits in the background while life continues quietly, like nothing is wrong. And that kind of quiet can change how you see every peaceful place after it. Number 2, Newtok, Alaska. Newtok, Alaska is one of the scariest stories in America because nothing supernatural has to happen for it to feel unreal. The town doesn't vanish in a dramatic way. It vanishes the way a shoreline vanishes, quietly, inch by inch, until one day you look up and realize the ground is no longer yours. Newtok sits in western Alaska along the Ninglake River, and for years the river has been chewing away at the land like it has a schedule. Erosion, storms, a thawing permafrost, everything that used to feel slow and distant starts acting like it's in a hurry. And when the land under your homes becomes unstable, the fear changes. It's not what's in the dark. It's what happens when the floor stops being a floor. So the community made a decision that sounds impossible until you understand the stakes. They started moving the town, not a few families, not a single building, the town. They chose a new site called Murdervik about 9 miles away on Nelson Island and began building a future from scratch, housing, infrastructure, everything that makes a place livable. If you've ever moved apartments, you know the chaos. Now imagine doing that with an entire community in Arctic weather, with limited transportation, and with the clock ticking, because the river doesn't wait for funding cycles. By 2019, families were already relocating into newly built homes at Murdervik. Over time, more and more people followed as more housing came online. And according to reporting in 2024, the last residents completed the move, making Newtok one of the first communities in the United States to relocate almost entirely because the land could no longer support it. That's why Newtok fits quietly disappearing in a way that hits hard. The disappearance isn't a mystery, it's a process. First, the shoreline creeps closer. Then services get harder. Then the town becomes split. Some people in the new place, some still in the old one, waiting for more homes, more resources, one more safe season. And the old town starts to feel like a set after filming wraps. Buildings still stand, but the life is gone. The silence isn't spooky, it's heavy. There's also something strangely human and heartbreaking about it. People aren't just leaving houses, they're leaving routines, memories, the familiar shape of home, and they're carrying that identity to a new place that doesn't have decades of history yet. It's like moving your entire family photo album into a brand new house where the walls still smell like fresh paint. If you need a little humor to breathe for a second, think of it like the most extreme change of address form ever written. Reason for move, the river is winning. And here's the question Newtok leaves you with. If a town can pack itself up and move because the earth is changing beneath it, what happens to the places that can't afford to move at all? Number 1, Herculaneum, Missouri. Herculaneum looks like a normal river town at first glance. It sits near the Mississippi, it has quiet streets, yards, and that small town calm that feels almost comforting. But this is one of the creepiest, quietly disappearing stories in America because the thing people were fleeing wasn't a person, or a creature, or even a storm. It was something you can't point at, something you can't hear coming, something you might breathe for years before you realize it's there. For more than a century, Herculaneum was tied to a lead smelter that became a defining part of the town's identity. Jobs, industry, routine, The kind of place where a big facility isn't just over there, it's woven into the local economy and family histories. But Lead has a dark side that doesn't stay contained behind a fence. Over time, environmental investigations and public health concerns focused on the same uncomfortable idea. Emissions and contamination were affecting the surrounding community, including residential areas. And here's what makes Herculaneum feel uniquely unsettling. The town didn't empty overnight. It hollowed out through paperwork, through buyouts, through families quietly taking deals to move away from the closest zones near the facility. One house at a time, one street at a time. Imagine watching your neighborhood shrink, not because people stopped liking it, but because the safest choice was to leave. No dramatic farewell, just moving trucks and for sale, signs that don't feel like normal real estate anymore. They feel like evacuation markers. This is also why the story sticks with American audiences. It's not a legend. It's a modern fear with a receipt. Government agencies got involved. Settlements were reached. The smelter eventually closed in 2013, but the emotional damage doesn't close on a deadline. Because when the danger is invisible, people keep asking the same question. How long was it happening before anyone forced it to stop? Picture the vibe for a second. A playground with fewer kids. A street where the same house sits empty longer than it should. A town where the loudest sound is the wind, and the quiet feels less like peace and more like absence. In a horror movie, you run from a monster. In Herculaneum, the monster is the kind that shows up in lab results and government reports, and by the time it has a name, the people who can leave already have. If you need a little dark humor to cut the tension, here's the best comparison. Herculaneum is like discovering your great deal apartment has hidden fees. Except the fees aren't on your lease, they're in the air, and you don't notice them until your whole family is already living there. So when you think about quietly disappearing, remember this entry. Because sometimes a town doesn't vanish into the woods. Sometimes it gets bought out, boxed up, and emptied, one signature at a time. And the scariest part is realizing how many places in America could follow that same pattern before anyone outside the zip code pays attention. These towns don't all disappear the same way. Some get swallowed by water, some get emptied by industry, paperwork, and invisible risks. Some fade out because the road stops leading anywhere that matters. But the creepiest part isn't the ruins or the legends. It's how normal life can quietly detach from a place until the town becomes a name on a map and nothing more. So here's my question for you. Which one of these towns hit you the hardest, and why? Was it the town that moved, the town that got erased, or the town that still looks livable until you understand what's underneath it? Drop your pick in the comments and tell me what detail you couldn't stop thinking about. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. And next time you take a back road on a long drive, maybe don't ignore that gut feeling when the streets get too quiet.